My mom once told me I wasn't worth the investment, and in that single moment, I understood how fragile love could be when it's measured by money and control rather than care or loyalty. My name is Kendall Parker, and I never imagined the person who raised me would become the reason I learned to stand completely on my own. It started the day I asked for help paying for my medical treatment. Mom crossed her arms, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "You're old enough to take care of yourself. I'm saving what's left for someone who deserves it." Her words hit harder than any diagnosis. I realized I wasn't the daughter she wanted me to be. Our house had always been ruled by her decisions. Every choice, every dollar, every word had to go through her. For years, I tried to stay quiet, convincing myself that if I worked harder, she might see me as more than an obligation. But when my health started failing, silence stopped working. So I did what she would never expect. I created an online fundraiser to pay for my own treatment. It wasn't about money, it was about finally proving that I didn't need her permission to survive. Within days, strangers helped me more than my own family ever had. Then Mom found out. Instead of being proud, she demanded I give her the money to cover the mortgage she was hiding from me. That was the moment everything inside me shifted. I told her no, and I meant it. What followed changed the shape of our family forever. Before we dive into my story, tell me what time it is where you're watching from and which city you're in. I want to know just how far this story has traveled. Growing up, I thought love was something you had to earn until I learned it wasn't. In our small Indiana house, rules were louder than laughter. Mom ran everything with the precision of a clock, believing order meant success. She wasn't cruel in the way people imagine, just distant, convinced that emotions made people weak. The house always smelled like coffee and cleaning spray, and silence was the price of peace. Kennedy, my older sister, was the kind of daughter Mom liked to show off. Her hair always brushed perfectly, her smile polished for every school photo. Mom praised her for being graceful and clever, as if every compliment she gave Kennedy came with a reminder of what I wasn't. From the time I could hold a broom, Mom said that a daughter's duty was not to complain. "Be useful, not needy," she told me whenever I hesitated to obey. I scrubbed floors, folded laundry, and made dinner, trying to fill the space where affection should have been. Kennedy came home late, glitter on her shoes from dance practice, and Mom would beam with pride while I stood quietly in the kitchen doorway. It didn't matter if I was tired or sick. The expectation was simple: keep going. The less I asked for, the less I seemed to exist, and that strange emptiness became something I carried like a secret. When I first started feeling ill, I thought it was just exhaustion from doing too much. My body felt heavy, like it belonged to someone else. One night, I gathered the courage to tell Mom I couldn't focus at school and that something was wrong. She didn't even pause her work. "That's your problem, not mine," she said. The words hit harder than any punishment could. It wasn't the first time she brushed me aside, but that night it felt final. I realized there would never be a moment when I was enough for her. After that, I stopped asking for help. I learned to rely on silence and endurance, the two things that never disappointed me. The house became smaller, the walls closer, and my own thoughts louder. I spent more time at the library after school, pretending to study while trying to forget how lonely it felt to go home. That's where I met my classmate Ethan Cole for the first time. Ethan wasn't like anyone else I knew. He noticed details other people ignored, like the way my hands shook when I turned pages, or how I avoided eye contact when someone raised their voice. He didn't ask intrusive questions. He just showed up quietly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. When I stayed late to shelve books that weren't mine, he stayed too. Sometimes we worked in silence, sometimes we talked about music or college plans, and sometimes he just smiled as if that was enough. One afternoon, I forgot my jacket and shivered as we stepped outside. Without hesitation, Ethan draped his over my shoulders and said, "You always take care of everyone else. Let someone take care of you for once." I didn't know how to respond. Kindness like that felt foreign, almost dangerous, but something in his voice softened the tightness in my chest. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen, not compared, not evaluated, just seen. It's strange how one person's quiet care can begin to rewrite what you believe about yourself. Until then, I thought worth had to be proven through effort, obedience, or sacrifice. Ethan's presence challenged that idea without ever trying to. He made ordinary moments feel like small acts of healing. And though I didn't realize it then, meeting him would become the first step toward understanding what love should have been all along. By the end of last winter, everything in our house started to crumble. It began quietly, the way most disasters do. Mom came home one evening later than usual, her coat half-buttoned, her expression unreadable. I was sitting at the table sorting through medical bills when she dropped her purse onto the counter and said, "They let me go." She had worked at the same bank for nearly 15 years, and suddenly the job was gone, swallowed by cutbacks. For a long moment, I didn't know what to say. She poured herself a glass of water and stared out the window, the silent stretching until it became unbearable. The next morning, she began calling the mortgage company. I could hear her voice through the walls, firm at first, then breaking. Words like extension and grace period filled the air. After that, she stopped talking to me altogether, as if my presence reminded her of what she couldn't fix. When Kennedy came back from Chicago to help out, Mom acted as though the sun had returned. Kennedy filled the house with noise and perfume and shopping bags. Within a week, she had taken over my old room and started ordering things online, calling them necessary comforts. Mom didn't complain. She just watched tired while her credit card bills grew taller than my stack of prescriptions. My own medical expenses were rising faster than either of us could manage. I tried to hide the letters from the hospital, but Mom always found them. One night, she tossed an envelope onto the table and said, "You're an adult. Handle it. I'm drained." Her voice wasn't cruel. It was empty, like someone who had run out of hope. I nodded, though my chest tightened. It wasn't anger, I felt it was resignation. I knew she didn't see me as her burden, but she certainly didn't see me as her responsibility anymore. Ethan was the only person who seemed to notice how fast things were unraveling. He picked me up from work one evening and asked if I had eaten. When I told him about Mom losing her job, he listened without interrupting. Then he said quietly, "You should start a fundraiser. Let people help you." The idea terrified me. Asking for help meant admitting that I needed it. Still that night, I sat in front of my laptop staring at a blank screen. After hours of hesitation, I began to type, not as a plea for money, but as a way to tell the truth. I wrote about the diagnosis, the endless appointments, and the way my family had fractured under the weight of it all. I hit post before I could change my mind. At first, there was silence. Then a single notification appeared, followed by another and another. Strangers left messages, some short, some deeply personal. They told me they had been through similar battles that they believed I deserved to heal. Donations began to appear, small at first, then larger. Within days, hundreds of people I had never met had contributed. I sat on my bed reading each message until the words blurred. Gratitude and grief twisted together inside me. I was thankful, yet heartbroken that compassion had to come from strangers instead of my own family. When Ethan called to ask how I felt, I told him I didn't know, because the truth was complicated. For the first time in years, I felt supported, but not by the people who should have been there. I scrolled through the list of donors, their names unfamiliar, yet somehow comforting. It struck me how kindness could come from unexpected places, and how sometimes the people who owe you love are the ones least capable of giving it. When spring came, things got worse than I ever imagined. The air in the house felt heavy, as if every word could turn into a spark. One afternoon, I returned from work to find Mom sitting at the dining table with her laptop open. Her expression was sharp, her jaw tight. Without looking at me, she said, "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" I froze. On the screen was my fundraiser page, the title glowing like a confession. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Mom turned the screen toward me and continued, "You embarrassed me. Everyone in town will think we're beggars." Her voice carried that low tremor she used whenever shame replaced reason. I tried to explain that it wasn't about her that people had chosen to help because they cared. She cut me off before I could finish. "You had no right to tell strangers about our family problems." That night, Kennedy joined the attack. She leaned against the doorway with her arms crossed and said, "You've always been dramatic. Guess you finally found a way to profit from it." The smirk on her face felt sharper than any insult. I wanted to defend myself, but my throat locked. Words could never change how they saw me. To them, I was the child who complained, the one who should stay quiet and grateful. A few days later, everything shifted again. Mom must have checked the fundraiser balance because she suddenly softened. Her tone was gentle, almost sweet. "You shouldn't keep that much money in your account. Let me manage it for you just to keep it safe," she said, while stirring her coffee. I realized then that her concern wasn't about me, it was about control. When I refused, she smiled tightly. "Fine, then at least be responsible and pay the mortgage. You're living under this roof too." The words hit like a trap. I tried to remind her that the donations were for medical bills, but she waved a hand, dismissing me as if I were a spoiled child. Ethan came over that evening. I told him everything, hoping maybe I had exaggerated the situation in my head. He listened quietly, then asked if I wanted him there when I spoke to Mom. I nodded. When we entered the living room, Mom was watching television, Kennedy scrolling on her phone beside her. Ethan started calmly explaining that the donations had legal restrictions and could only be used for my treatment. Mom's face hardened. "Who are you to tell me how to handle my daughter's money?" she snapped. Ethan didn't raise his voice. "It's not your daughter's money, it's hers," he said, glancing at me. The room went silent except for the ticking clock. Kennedy laughed under her breath and said, "Of course she has a man defending her. That's new." Mom stood up, anger flushing her face. "You think you know everything, but you don't understand what I've sacrificed." She turned to me. "I gave you life, and this is how you repay me." By parading our struggles online, I felt something inside me collapse. Not from guilt, but from clarity. There was no argument left to make, no apology that would ever be enough. I realized then that love in this house had always come with conditions, and the price kept rising. Ethan reached for my hand, a small gesture that steadied me. Mom's words kept coming, but they blurred into noise. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm. "I think it's time I move out." For the first time, no one answered. Kennedy rolled her eyes. Mom turned away. I walked to my room, closed the door, and packed what little I owned. The night outside was quiet, but for me, it sounded like freedom. 2 days later, I packed what I could and walked out of that house. Ethan met me outside, standing by his car, his face quiet but certain. We didn't say much during the drive. Words would have made it feel too final. His apartment was small, a one-bedroom space near campus with walls the color of cream and a faint smell of coffee. When I stepped inside, the silence felt strange, not heavy like at home, but open, uncertain, as if it belonged to possibility. I placed my single suitcase by the wall and sat down, realizing that freedom did not feel like triumph. It felt like standing on a cliff edge with no map. That night, as rain fell softly against the windows, Ethan made us soup from instant noodles and leftover vegetables. We ate in silence, both aware that something irreversible had begun. When I went to bed, the sound of the rain mixed with the hum of the refrigerator, and for the first time in months, I slept without waking in fear. The next morning, I woke to a long message from Mom. Her words filled the screen, heavy with accusation. She wrote that I had betrayed my family, that I had humiliated her in front of neighbors, and that I had turned strangers against my own blood. Every sentence felt like a stone thrown in my direction. I read it twice before turning off my phone. I knew responding would only reopen wounds she had no interest in healing. I stayed quiet, though inside, I wanted to tell her that walking away was not betrayal, but survival. By the end of the week, Kennedy found her own way to attack. I saw her post online a picture from my fundraiser paired with a caption that read, "Some people will do anything for sympathy, even steal from those who help them." The comments came fast, filled with disbelief and judgment. Friends from school texted to ask if it was true. My hands shook as I tried to explain, but how do you defend yourself when your own sister is the one tearing you apart? Ethan saw my face and took the phone gently from my hand. "We'll fix this," he said, his voice steady. He contacted a lawyer that evening, a woman named Ms. Harlow, who specialized in digital fraud cases. She met us in her small office filled with books and certificates that glowed under the soft light. After reading the fundraiser details and donation records, she assured us everything was legal and transparent. "You've done nothing wrong," she said firmly. "But the internet can be cruel. The truth takes longer to reach people than lies do." I felt tears rise but blink them back. Ethan squeezed my hand, and I realized that sometimes strength is not in fighting louder, but in standing quietly when you are misunderstood. In the following weeks, life began to rebuild itself in slow fragments. Ethan worked late shifts at the coffee shop near the university, and I found a part-time job at a bookstore. The smell of paper and ink became a kind of comfort, reminding me that stories could survive chaos. I used the fundraiser money carefully, paying for treatments and hospital visits, while saving every receipt in a folder. Each payment felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, proof that I could stand on my own without needing permission to exist. At night, when the city lights shimmered through the curtains, I sometimes thought about home. I wondered if Mom ever looked at my old room, or if Kennedy still talked about me at dinner. The anger I once carried began to fade, replaced by something quieter: acceptance, maybe even pity. People who cannot love without control often mistake freedom for betrayal. Ethan once told me that healing is not about forgetting, but about learning to look back without shaking. Sitting there beside him in our tiny apartment, I started to believe he might be right. Months later, karma showed up right at our old doorstep. Ethan and I had just finished dinner when a message arrived from a former neighbor. She said men from the bank had come to seize the property. For a moment, I stared at the screen, unable to process the words. That house had once been everything: our pride, our battlefield, our silence. Now, it was gone. The bank had finally reclaimed it after Mom failed to make the payments. I imagined her standing by the porch, the one she used to decorate with flowers every spring, now watching strangers take away the last thing she owned. It should have made me angry, but all I felt was an ache of finality. A week later, I drove past the neighborhood. The lawn was overgrown, the windows boarded. Kennedy stood outside arguing with someone on the phone. She looked thinner. Her clothes wrinkled, her voice strained. Later, I learned she had lost her job and moved back with Mom, but the two couldn't coexist under one roof for long. Their fights became the new soundtrack of that house until the day it stopped belonging to them. People in town whispered that pride had finally met its match. One afternoon, as I was locking up the bookstore, our neighbor, Mr. Lewis, approached me. He was 60, a retired accountant who had lived next to us for more than 20 years. His expression was uneasy, as if he had debated whether to speak. "I thought you should know," he said quietly. "Your mom came to me months ago asking for help. She said it was to refinance the mortgage, but when I looked at the paperwork, I realized she had used your name and social security number to apply for a personal loan." I felt the ground tilt beneath me. My first instinct was denial. Mom wouldn't have done that. Then, like a cold tide, the truth settled in: she would have. Mr. Lewis sighed. "I didn't sign as a witness, but I kept a copy. I figured you might need it someday." He handed me a small envelope, his eyes soft with apology. Inside were documents showing that the loan had been taken out under my name and defaulted months ago. My credit could have been destroyed without me even knowing. Gratitude and grief collided in my chest. I thanked him, and he nodded before walking away, leaving me with the proof of betrayal that was no longer surprising. Ethan drove me to the bank the next morning. We met with the branch manager and showed the documents explaining that I had never authorized the loan. They opened an investigation immediately. 2 weeks later, I received confirmation that the fraudulent account had been closed and my record cleared. When I told Ethan, he simply said, "You did the right thing." But inside, I felt nothing triumphant about justice. It was just another wound cleaned, but not healed. Not long after Mom called. Her voice trembled in a way I had never heard before. "I made mistakes," she said. "They're taking everything. I don't have anywhere to go. Can you help me?" The silence that followed felt endless. I thought of every time she had told me I wasn't worth investing in, every time she'd chosen control over love. Ethan watched me, his expression calm but resolute. Then he said softly, "You don't owe her anything. You owe yourself peace." I closed my eyes, letting the weight of his words settle. For the first time, I understood that forgiveness and rescue are not the same thing. I wished her well, but told her I couldn't help. When the call ended, I sat in silence, feeling both lighter and lonelier than ever before. The past had finally folded in on itself, leaving behind only the truth some debts can be repaid with money, but others can only be released by walking away. A year later, my life looked nothing like it used to. The days no longer felt like survival, but like quiet victories strung together by purpose. I graduated with my degree in public health, the same major I had once chosen to make sense of the world's cruelty. When I stepped across the stage to receive my diploma, I caught sight of Ethan in the crowd. His smile was the kind that steadied me, the kind that reminded me of every long night spent studying on the floor of our small apartment, while the world outside forgot we existed. The announcement of a full scholarship for graduate studies came a week later, and I remember holding the letter close to my chest, realizing I had finally built a life that belonged entirely to me. Ethan completed his medical program that same summer. We celebrated by taking a trip to the coast, something we had promised ourselves since the first winter we shared together. It was late evening when he led me down to the beach, the sky folding itself into a palette of amber and lilac. He knelt in the sand holding a small ring that caught the last light of the day. His voice was steady but filled with a softness that made my heart tremble. "You once told me love was what you had to earn," he said. "But you've already earned everything. Will you marry me?" The ocean whispered behind us a gentle applause to the moment I said yes. We decided on a small ceremony in the university garden where we had met. It was early autumn, and the air carried that calm sweetness that lingers before winter arrives. Rows of white chairs lined the pathway between the trees, and strings of paper lights swayed above them. Our friends from school helped decorate the place with wildflowers, simple but full of color. I wanted nothing grand, only something that felt honest. When I looked around, I saw faces that had chosen to stay through the chaos. That, to me, was family. I mailed a wedding invitation to Mom 2 months before the ceremony. I did not include a return address. There were no expectations, no silent hopes tucked inside the envelope. It was not an act of reconciliation, but one of closure. Kennedy never replied either, though someone mentioned she had moved to another city. This time, her absence did not ache. People leave holes in your life, but time teaches you that emptiness can also become space for light. On the morning of the wedding, the sky opened clear and forgiving. I walked through the garden holding a bouquet of white roses, my steps slow but certain. When I reached Ethan, he looked at me with that same expression he had worn on the day I walked out of my mother's house, a mixture of pride and peace. The ceremony began quietly. There were no lavish vows, only words spoken with truth. When it was my turn, I looked at Ethan and said, "Love isn't blood, it's choice." My voice did not shake because I believed every word. After the applause, faded music filled the air, soft and warm like sunlight. We danced beneath the trees, the leaves above us shifting like small pieces of forgiveness. I thought of how strange it was that pain could grow into something beautiful if you let it breathe long enough. That night, as lanterns flickered across the garden and laughter replaced the sound of grief, I realized that peace was never something I had to find. It had been waiting all along just beyond the noise the moment I chose to stop chasing what was gone. Looking back now, I don't hate my mom, but I finally understand her. Time has a way of softening the edges of memories that once cut so deep. Mom was never a villain. She was simply a woman who feared losing control more than losing love. Her life had been built on the belief that power could protect her from pain, and when that power crumbled, she didn't know who she was without it. I used to see her as someone cruel, but now I see her as someone scared, someone who never learned how to be loved without fear. Kennedy left town not long after our wedding. No one knew where she went, and no one asked anymore. For years, she had lived in the echo of Mom's expectations, chasing approval that always slipped away. Maybe leaving was her version of healing, or maybe it was just another way of running. I've stopped trying to untangle her choices. Some stories aren't meant to circle back. Ethan and I built a quiet life together. We opened a small scholarship fund for students who had faced hardship, the kind of young people who reminded us of who we used to be, hopeful but uncertain, wounded, but still willing to try. Every year we meet the students we sponsor and listen to their dreams. Each story feels like a thread connecting what I survived to what I've become. It reminds me that pain, when transformed, can turn into something that gives back. Sometimes on quiet mornings I think of Mom. I wonder if she ever found peace in her own way, if she ever forgave herself for what she couldn't give. I no longer feel the need to fix what's broken between us. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't an invitation to return. It's a release that lets both people stop bleeding. Letting go doesn't erase what happened, but it frees you from carrying it everywhere you go. Ethan often tells me that our home feels like calm water, steady, clear, and deep. I think that's the truest definition of happiness. It isn't loud or spectacular. It's the quiet sense that you are exactly where you belong with someone who chooses you every day without condition. There's a kind of sacred peace in knowing that love doesn't have to hurt to be real. I built my own family, and that's enough. Sometimes family isn't about blood, it's about respect, support, and peace. Walking away from those who hurt you isn't cruelty, it's strength. Protect your heart and learn to love yourself first, because no one else can do that for you. Healing isn't about forgetting or pretending it didn't happen. It's about honoring the lessons pain leaves behind and using them to build a life that finally feels like your own. Thank you for listening to the end of my story. If you've ever had to choose yourself over someone you love, tell me what it taught you. Leave a comment and share your thoughts, because your voice might be what someone else needs to hear today. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind you that no matter what you've lost, you're never truly alone.